Coming up next on Backroads, in central Montana we'll meet a record-breaking weather observer, and in Butte, a record-making musician. We'll only have 2 hours to explore Glen, Tana, but all day to enjoy an artist in the eastern town of Westby. And we'll relax in the cool water of the Boulder River near Big Timber. All that before this episode of Backroads expires.
Backroads of Montana is made possible with production support from the Greater Montana Foundation, Travel Montana, and the University of Montana, where the discovery continues.
Well, it's beautiful with spacious skies, has amber waves of green, and has purple mountains majestic that rise up out of the plains. And all across America, from sea to shining sea, where the mountains and the prairies meet, is a place I need to be. Home is where Montana is my home. From mountain peaks to prairie lands, the places I have known. And I'm bound to ramble, yes, I'm bound to roam. And when I'm in off the road now, boys, Montana is my home.
Hello, I'm William Marcus. Welcome to the Backroads of Montana, a program about the people and places that make Montana unique. Today we're in historic Fort Benton on the Missouri River. Established in 1846 as a fur trading post, Fort Benton declares itself as the oldest continuously inhabited settlement in Montana. Sandwiched between the westernmost navigable point on the Missouri River and the eastern terminus of the Mullen Road, Fort Benton was once the West's most important transportation center. It was the destination for countless riverboats, whose decks were full of miners, homesteaders, fur trappers, and others anticipating a new life in Montana. On their return east, the same boats shipped out placer gold, whiskey, the first copper ores, and the last buffalo robes. Known as the birthplace of Montana, Fort Benton is rich in the stories of its frontier past, like the story of Shep, Montana's most famous canine. In August 1936, the body of an unknown sheepherder was shipped by rail back east for burial. From that point on, townspeople noticed that a dog of collie breed met each train that arrived in Fort Benton. For 5.5 years, Shep kept his vigil, awaiting a master who would never return. Today, this bronze statue honors Shep's devotion. It's by the late Montana artist Bob Scriver. It's called Shep, Forever Faithful. Our first story introduces us to a man who keeps a vigil of another sort. His is a devotion to the land and to the wind and rain that affect it. Just outside the town of Roy, 7 miles down Huckle Road, past the old Huckle School, is the home of Frank Huckle.
Huckle, C-I-M-R-H-A-K-L. Good Irish name.
Yeah, he can talk to anybody anywhere and make friends, and always been that way.
What Frank likes to talk about is the weather. Frank is a volunteer cooperative weather observer for the National Weather Service. Every evening at precisely 6 o'clock, he records the temperature, measures any precipitation, and sends the information to Great Falls. It's a simple task, but one that must be done. Frank Huckle has been doing it for 63 years, longer than anyone in the Northwest.
They call me the Dean of Weather Observers because nobody in the state ever hit 63.
My countrymen and my friend.
In 1938, FDR was in his second term. Orson Welles panicked the country with his radio broadcast about a Martian invasion. Joe DiMaggio was the home run king, and Frank Huckle was studying precipitation levels. When county extension agents heard that Frank was collecting rainfall in some rusty tin cans, they delivered a modern official reporting station. It's been the focal point of the Huckle front yard ever since.
We'll go down to the shelter and we'll take the minimum and maximum temperature. Done that many times. There's our 2 thermometers.
The daily routine is brief. In less than a minute, Frank notes the temperature, resets his thermometers, and checks the gauge for a hopeful trace of rain.
There ain't nothing there. Well, you got to wait till it starts snowing and raining. That's the only thing. You always say that next year.
Homesteaders who settled in next year country understood the relationship between weather and crop yield. For the 4 generations of Simmerhockles, it's a respect that began in 1913. That year, Frank Sr. and Stella arrived in Roy, Montana, with 2 daughters and an infant son. That's Frank, at 14 months, in his mother's arms. On the original 240-acre homestead, Frank learned how to plow, seed, disc, and harvest behind a horse. And he learned how to make this unyielding country productive. Today, the farm sprawls over 5,000 acres. He courted Marie Bowser. They wed, and together raised wheat, livestock, and 5 children. From the reporting station in the front yard, the Simmerhockle family saw their country through the bitterly cold years.
The worst winter was 49 and 50.
The dry years.
1942 was 7.03.
And always the wind.
Pretty soon it hit 88. That's the highest I ever seen it.
Eventually, his long years of dedication garnered every award a volunteer weather observer can win, including the Thomas Jefferson Award. Now, at 92, Frank has slowed down. He's happy to record his readings from the remote high-low thermometer inside a warm kitchen. He doesn't need to go outside, unless it's to stroll in Leroy's Park, a shady oasis that memorializes his son who died, or to walk with his granddaughter, Doreen. She and her husband, Rod, are building a home just north of the original homestead. Soon, Doreen will officially take over Frank's observer duties and carry on the Simmerhockle weather legacy, a tradition that began with her grandfather's natural curiosity, a set of rusty tin cans, and a love for this rugged country.
Well, I can't promise 63 years of weather observing, but we will continue that tradition on here as long as we're here, and I hope that my children will continue to do the same thing. He's just a great man.
The National Weather Service office in Great Falls analyzes the data, especially the precipitation levels, collected by Frank Simmerhockle and other weather observers. It's used to predict which portions of Montana might experience a drought in the immediate future. When the Chouteau County Courthouse here in Fort Benton was built in 1884, the $50,000 budget dried up quickly, and builders couldn't afford to put a clock in the clock tower. Instead, they nailed up 2 false wooden hands. The hands were permanently set at 12:20. In 1999, Chouteau County elementary schools had a fund drive and raised over $750. Thanks to the pennies of local children, the 115-year-old courthouse finally had a real clock. In Butte, we visited a man who's just a bit younger than this courthouse. At 98, he's one of the city's oldest musicians. He's forgotten more songs than any of us would ever learn. He plays the button accordion, and his name is John the Yank Harrington. It's final rehearsal time for John the Yank Harrington. He's running through an old Irish song with his friend and guitarist Mick Kavanagh. The Yank and his button accordion are the opening acts for this year's Butte Folk Festival. For almost a century, he's been playing the songs of his Irish heritage, songs he grew up with.
Well, I liked the tunes that my father was playing and my mother were playing, and I learned them tunes too off of them, you know.
Back in his apartment in uptown Butte, Harrington does a bit more preparation for tonight's concert. Not that he needs the practice.
Just picked them up by ear, you know, and they stay in my head. I could play 200 or 300 of them right now, and all kinds of them I've forgotten, you know. When I hear them, I pick them, I memorize them, you know, in my head, and then I can play them off on the accordion.
Harrington was born in Utah, where his father worked in the mines. John and his family followed their father to Butte. After his parents died, John traveled to Ireland, where he received his unique nickname.
But anyway, when we got back to Ireland, and I got up to my grandmother's place there, they says, "Oh, he's a Yank." And from then on, everybody started calling me the Yank. And then a lot of them didn't even know my last name. They just say the Yank. That's John the Yank, you know.
The Yank would eventually move back to the United States, working on the subway in New York City before settling back in Butte. His music lives on as well. The tunes he plays are his memories, his experiences, and his life.
Just about every day I play something, you know. If I don't play on the accordion, I'll take out one of the violins and play a few tunes on it just to keep practiced, you know.
Well, practice has ended, and it's almost showtime. People have crowded into Butte's historic Motherlode Theater for tonight's performance.
Our first performer, as has been our custom, is Butte's senior musician. He has been playing music for longer than most of us have been alive. Would you please welcome Yank Harrington and Mick Cavanaugh.
John Harrington, Mick Cavanaugh. Thank you very much.
That old-time music is what's keeping me alive.
John the Yank Harrington released his first album in 1999. It features some of his favorite Scottish and Irish tunes. It's been well received, selling nearly 1,500 copies. John donated all the profits to an Irish dance school in Butte. When engineers built this bridge in Fort Benton, they included a 225-foot turnspan that would swing open, allowing steamboats to pass through. But by the time the bridge was finished in 1888, railroads had penetrated Montana and riverboats passed into transportation history. The turnspan opened its first and last time in 1908 for the steamer the OK. A year later, the OK burned, and the turnspan was lost in a flood. The power of rivers has carved some spectacular scenery in Montana. Just south of Big Timber, we stopped at Natural Bridge State Park to admire the sights and sounds of the Boulder River. Under the snout of a local landmark called the Lion's Head, the Boulder River flows into a narrow, rocky canyon. Trails and a bridge offer close-up views of the river to a point where it disappears underground. During high runoff seasons in the spring, the river floods the canyon and spills over the rocky cliffs, creating a spectacular waterfall, captured here on home video. Natural Bridge State Park is one of those areas with few visitors. You'll enjoy your time alone with nature, but be aware that small children and pets should be at your side at all times. Those rock cliffs are high, and the trail and lookouts have no railings. From its vantage point on the Missouri River, the Grand Union Hotel has presided over the Fort Benton Business District for 120 years. At one time, it featured a secret lookout where guards could supervise gold shipments along the river. Its design reflects an optimistic town, unaware of the imminent coming of rail service and an economic shift from the Northwest's transportation hub to the state's leading wheat producer. Wheat has always been a staple in the northeastern town of Glen, Tana. When our Backroads crew arrived, we figured we'd be in town a couple of days, but we found ourselves facing an unexpected deadline. It looks bigger from Highway 248. Still, Glen, Montana is a community of only a dozen people. But what it lacks in size, it makes up for in space. Empty enough for an unobstructed view of the new day. Big enough to boast 2 exits into town. And once there, room enough to park almost anywhere. Odd that any of this space would be regulated by a parking meter. 2 bits bought us exactly 2 hours. So, like the classic Western movie, we found that we were welcome in Glen, Tana. Until...
Do not forsake me, oh my darling.
Glen, Tana flutters to life when Darlene Greenwood readies the post office for another day.
And how many stamps can I interest you in buying? The love stamps are sell very well here because we get along real well as a community.
The post office doubles as the town's only business. Darlene sells ice cream, frozen pizza, and pop.
Glen, Tana only uses about 2-3 cases a month, but we still come up here and stop.
Today's first customer is 5-year-old Shandy Dearland, Glen, Tana's only child. Shandy stops in most mornings for some gum and to discuss the difficulties of farm life.
You work and you work your butt off all day, and
this is the only place to raise children.
Shandy's grandparents, Mel and Ursula, believe that small communities offer the best environments in which to grow and learn.
Well, how old is Nicholas?
He's 8.
8. Anyway, he knows now what a 9/16 and a 3/4 inch wrench is.
Helen and Cliff Heck meant to spend 1 year in friendly Glen, Tana, but have remained for 45. As unofficial mayor, Helen's biggest responsibility is scheduling the popular community hall. No one dares miss a baby shower or a retirement party if it's held in Glen, Tana. The parking meter was Helen's idea.
Then we just stuck it out there. Been having a lot of fun with it.
Our fun expires in 60 minutes. Plenty of time to learn a little Glen, Tana history from resident historian Pete Schuster.
Glen, Tana was kind of a German settlement in the midst of all the Scandinavians that settled up in this northeastern part of Montana. And so, yes, it was tight-knit community because of that.
The Schuster family arrived in 1910. Aunt Anne gave the town its name and served as its first school teacher. She would influence and educate Glen, Tana's children for the next 40 years. For a while, the town flourished with 2 banks, 3 elevators, and dozens of businesses. But the Depression and the dry years that followed brought a slow decline to Glen, Tana. Banks failed. The school closed in 1967. The railroad pulled out in the late 80s.
Maybe there's hope for some of these little communities yet somewhere along the line.
In the time remaining, we toured what's left of Glen, Tana with Pat and Leroy Stein in their 1952 Oldsmobile Rocket 88. Leroy is proud of the powerful V8 engine, the original upholstery, and the fact that some days he can take the whole town for a ride.
6 people in Glen, Tana in the wintertime.
Leroy's friends linger in the post office lounge. Still time to catch up on local news or examine the turtle that Good Samaritan Alf Hames rescued out on the highway. Our time has expired.
Oh, that's all right. You're from out of town, so we'll just let it go this time. Okay?
The mayor's forgiveness comes as no surprise. Not in this friendly community where neighbors can be relied upon, where Darlene's Love Series is the #1 selling stamp. Though small, Glen, Tana's history, humor, and heart are as big as the space that surrounds it. Each fall, the women at the Catholic Church organize the Harvest Festival. This year, more than 300 of Glen Tana's closest friends and neighbors, some as far away as Plentywood, showed up for a turkey dinner with all the fixins. In 1976, the Upper Missouri River from Fort Benton to the Fred Robinson Bridge was declared the National Wild and Scenic Missouri River. This 150-mile section still displays the unique beauty that awed Lewis and Clark in 1805. It's an excellent area to view and photograph bald eagles, golden eagles, ducks, and Canadian geese. Our final story takes us to extreme northeastern Montana and a man who's been watching birds his whole life. But for him, bird watching is more than a hobby. It's led to lasting friendships and a promising career. On the plains of eastern Montana, there's a tiny green oasis for migrating birds. This little park in this little town also nurtured a boy's love for birds. More than 30 years ago, Ted Nordhagen didn't know a career would start here.
I read about these life lists where you put down all the birds you've seen, and I decided that day I would come over here and start my life list, and I'll never forget it because I walked down the street, and all the while down the street I could hear this bird singing, and just amazing song. And I come down to the end of the corner here, and there was a rose-breasted grosbeak, a bird that at that time was little known in Montana. So I can't honestly remember a time when I wasn't thinking about birds or had some kind of an interest in birds. I don't know where that came from.
Bird watching was a lonely pursuit for a young Ted Nordhagen. Isolated in Westby, he began thinking he was the only person in the world with this bird fascination. Until 1967, when he read an article in the Billings Gazette. The story featured Helen Carlson, a prominent member of the Yellowstone Valley Audubon Society. Helen's seen more species of birds in Montana than anyone.
So that's all I do. I mean, that's my life. It's my life work, I guess.
Up to that point, I really had never had any exposure to other birders, bird watchers, and it had been kind of a solitary existence all by myself. And I thought, I've got to get a hold of this lady and introduce myself.
13-year-old Ted Nordhagen sat down and wrote a letter to Helen.
And Helen reminded me the other day, she said I had typewritten this letter. I don't recall that, but I must have. I know we had a typewriter, and I always being the perfectionist probably had to have it just right,
Well, I thought it was a man because it was typed. And so I put together a packet and sent, and then I got a letter from him telling me that he was in junior high.
Helen encouraged the young perfectionist to keep looking at birds, and teenage Ted eagerly agreed.
Right, and at the same time that I was looking at birds, I always had that other connection. I've never looked at a bird without thinking about drawing one.
Soon Ted sent these drawings to Helen, signed by the only person who thought they mattered. Ted never imagined their future value. Next, it was time for these long-distance friends to meet. Helen and two of her friends packed up and made the 400-mile drive from Billings to Westby.
And so we just went and found his house and picked up this little kid and took him birding with us all day. He was thrilled to death to think these three old ladies would come all the way from Billings to bird with his kid.
I was pretty thrilled, actually. I thought that I'd kind of entered into a new phase, birding with other people. Oh, that's a stunner of a bird. That is beautiful.
Oh, it's just gorgeous.
There is just simply no end to the variations and the colors and the plumages, the way it looks, the way it behaves, the way it acts. Soft, subtle colors, the grays, muted grays. I've had pretty good success.
Ted was sharing his birding experience with others, but a career with birds and art would have to wait. Ted met Tina. They started a family. To pay the bills, Ted drove a truck in the oil fields of eastern Montana. It gave him more opportunities to look at birds, but he always returned to his favorite spot.
I mean, I almost think of this as my park, and I have to be reminded sometimes that this isn't my park. It truly is a remarkable spot. It's special to me.
13 years went by. Ted's youngest son took an interest in birds, but something was still missing for Ted. Tina knew what it was. She encouraged Ted to pursue his passion for birds and art. she could see it was time for a job change.
Oh boy, you got that security of a job and a steady paycheck coming in, and at the same time you've always had this dream and running in the background that you'd like to try to pursue, and so we just took the plunge.
Ted landed a freelance illustration job and began the tough task of drawing and painting for bird books and field guides.
I mean, it has to be as accurate a portrayal of the bird as possible. So that's demanding. Illustration work is very demanding, particularly with scientific illustrations.
It was a perfect match for the self-proclaimed perfectionist.
And I mean, you're always trying to raise the bar a little bit for yourself, always trying to improve your skills. And it's always kind of tantalizingly elusive. You're never quite ever there. Whoop, look at that. That's called a mistake.
Ted's work has appeared in more than a dozen publications in the United States and Canada. He's making a living doing what he loves, and many people see his art. But it's the work he signed as a teenager, the rough drawings that few people see. This work has become priceless.
I have 3 owls in the living room on the wall that he did when he was in junior high.
I've been trying to trade with her for a long time, and she just won't give them up.
He isn't very pleased with them now but I told him I knew him when, and he wasn't going to get them back.
She still she's hung on to every one of those. She still has all that work hanging in her living room, a gallery of bird art from me from, oh goodness, 25 years ago or more.
Every year during their long friendship, in the tiny park, the well-known bird watcher and the well-known bird illustrator get together. Sharing their friendship,
wearing the choke cherry,
facing us,
and the inspiration that comes from seeing that next bird.
Come on.
Follow the leader.
Ted is constantly trying to improve his artistic technique. Each year he attends an artist's retreat with some of the premier bird illustrators in the country. Well, that's our show. We'd like to thank the people in and around Fort Benton for all their help and cooperation. If you have a story idea for the Backroads crew, drop us a line at the Backroads of Montana, the University of Montana, Missoula, Montana, 59812. And remember, if you've missed any previous Backroads episodes, they're all available at your local city-county library. As long as you keep watching, we'll keep covering the Backroads of Montana. I'm William Marcus. See you next time. To order a copy of this or other Backroad shows, or for more information, visit us online at www.montanapbs.org or call 1-800-227-5836.
Backroads of Montana is made possible with production support from the Greater Montana Foundation, Travel Montana, and the University of Montana, where the discovery continues.
Home is where Montana is my home. From mountain peaks to prairie lands, the places I have known. And I'm bound to ramble, yes, I'm bound to roam. And when I'm in off the road now, boys, Montana is my home. Coming in off the road now, boys, you know I'm heading home.